Have the anti-Israeli campus protests this past spring incited similar aggression on public streets and in front of private residences? Joining me now to discuss the protest is Zachary Marschall, Editor-in-Chief of Campus Reform and Adjunct Assistant Professor at the University of Kentucky. Zachary, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Ohio Congressman Greg Landsman posting on X last night that a group of masked anti-Israel protesters pitched an encampment on a public street outside of his home early Sunday morning, reportedly remaining through the evening. He said police had to escort his family in and out of his Cincinnati home for their safety. Have these anti-Israel campus protests incited non-students to take the same aggressive actions outside lawmakers' homes? And where is the line drawn between free speech and harassment?
Yeah, so I wrote a piece for Campus Reform a couple months ago talking about how these tent encampments and the negotiations that the universities made with them to disband them in May kind of erase the difference we have been accustomed to between being on campus and being off campus. We saw Students for Justice in Palestine, which is behind a lot of the campus protests over the last year, also be involved in the protests at the DNC in August. So we are now seeing a mixture of college students and grown adults participating in each other's events, both on campus and off campus. And where we have to draw the line is we have to draw the line when it comes to physical intimidation and harassment. And that can be either through physical acts of punching students, knocking them unconscious, as we have seen on college campuses, or calling for a global intifada or revolution, which is the same thing as calling for genocide against Jews. What we're talking about is speech and action that is meant to incite more violence. This is not just about political disagreements. This is about personal safety.
So, Zachary, how do protests impact the ability for people to mourn the October 7th massacre victims?
The videos we're seeing out of New York City today are horrific. We're seeing a lot of pro-Israel and a lot of Jewish Americans in New York City with Israeli flags or with other markers identifying them as Jewish being harassed and being chased down streets by pro-Hamas protesters. They are being physically attacked. They are being chased into buildings because they are Jewish. That is unacceptable. And the lack of outrage we have seen today from national media is even worse, because what other minority would suffer the same event and not have wall-to-wall media coverage of that happen? There is a choice to ignore and suppress the kind of discrimination Jewish Americans have been facing in the last month, and it started on college campuses, but that has gone off campus, and people need to acknowledge what the reality is.
Zachary, it's clear that this issue is polarizing college campuses. How can universities create a safe space, if you will, and promote constructive dialogue between people with differing views on this very complex issue?
One of the positive things we've seen starting in the summer is that a lot of universities, and some of the big ones like Harvard and UCLA, are implementing neutrality policies. And these policies say we're not going to take a stand on political issues that do not directly affect campus. That is good because it is depoliticizing the campus environments that kind of enabled and empowered these activists to take their campuses hostage in the past 12 months. We're also seeing a lot of universities implement new non-discrimination policies, such as at NYU, and other universities are putting in new regulations on protests to clamp down on disruptive protests and violent protests, specifically in the case of anti-Israel demonstrations. So the more universities are able to adopt these measures, depoliticize their campus, and restrict the freedom students have had to harass and assault their peers, the more successful higher education will be to revert back to the traditional mission and values that higher learning should stand for.
Zachary Marschall, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Of course.